Okay, good morning, ladies. I'm really happy to see you all here today. So today we're continuing with this chapter 15, verses 16 to 18. Here, Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so verse 16. So I'll read through the verses. I'll read the purport to one and the Sanskrit to another. Get myself out of the way here. Great generals like Bhīṣma, Droṇa, Karṇa, Bhūriśravā, Suśarmā, Śalya, Jayadratha and Bāhlika all directed their invincible weapons against me. But by his Lord Kṛṣṇa's grace, they could not even touch a hair on my head. Similarly, Prahlāda Mahārāja, the supreme devotee of Lord Nṛsiṁhadeva, was unaffected by the weapons the demons used against him. Verse 17. It was by his mercy only that my enemies neglected to kill me when I descended from my chariot to get water for my thirsty horses. And it was due to my lack of esteem for my Lord that I dared engage him as my chariot driver, for he is worshipped and offered services by the best men to attain salvation. So this is the first half of this purport because I felt it was the most relevant to what I wanted to share today. The Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead Sri Kṛṣṇa, is the object of worship both by impersonalists and by the devotees of the Lord. The impersonalists worship his glowing effulgence emanating from his transcendental body of eternal form, bliss, and knowledge. And the devotees worship him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Those who are below, even the impersonalists, consider him to be one of the great historical personalities. The Lord, however, descends to attract all by his specific transcendental pastimes, and thus he plays the part of the most perfect master, friend, son, and lover. His transcendental relation with Arjuna was in friendship, and the Lord therefore played the part perfectly, as he did with his parents, lovers, and wives. While playing in such a perfect transcendental relation, the devotee forgets by the internal potency of the Lord that his friend or son is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although sometimes the devotee is bewildered by the acts of the Lord. After the departure of the Lord, Arjuna was conscious of his great friend, but there was no mistake on the part of Arjuna, nor any ill estimation of the Lord. Intelligent men are attracted by the transcendental acting of the Lord with a pure, unalloyed devotee like Arjuna. Verse 18. Narmani udara ruchira sita shobhitani. He partha herjuna sakhe kurunandaneti. Sanjal pitani naradeva hridish prishani. Martur lutanti hridayam mama madhavasya. O king, his jokings and frank talks were pleasing and beautifully decorated with smiles. His addresses unto me as, O son of Pratha, O friend, O son of the Kuru dynasty, and all such heartiness are now remembered by me, and thus I am overwhelmed. Today I wanted to share about the sacred process of grief. And so I'm going to stop sharing. I'll start off with some pranam mantras. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Vena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namo. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Harine Nirvishesha Srinivadi Pashtapadu. Vanchakalpa Taruvya Kripa Sindhivya Yudhita. Pita Nam Pavaniya Vaishnavya Namo. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivastava Gaura Bhakti. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And so I am begging for your blessings that I may be able to speak something that is, that makes sense. Something out of a real realization. My intention today was to explore our sacred literature in a vulnerable and sincere way. And so this is my offering. I think I saw something. I wonder if it's not from Bhakti. Okay. Okay, so Arjuna's in grief. Arjuna is, we're witnessing his process of being in grief. And the first thing that I noticed, because I often, well, not often, I study communication, nonviolent communication, conscious communication. I realized going through this chapter, wow, Arjuna is going on verse by, verse after verse, and no one's interrupting him or offering him any advice. The person on the other side of him, which is Yudhisthira, he's a really good listener, and effective listening is one of those, probably the most powerful and healing skills that we can cultivate, particularly when someone is going through the grieving process, and that includes ourselves. And so I just wanted to point that out, that, the Bhagavatam also has these, it shows us these things that can seem, good listening skills, how, maybe you use that in, your work environment, or when a friend is telling you something, but this is a much deeper process, and we're watching it. So he's being heard. I'm having a little technical situation. Okay, so grief it's defined as sorrow or suffering, usually from bereavement. So when we have that feeling of being deprived of something, and in often cases, it's being deprived of someone's presence, and that we understand as bereavement, and this deep, profound grief of having lost something. It can also be things or situations, times, but it's often most powerfully felt when it's related to another person. Anyone who's experienced grief, or even has witnessed a loved one going through the grief process, knows that it's a very profound, complicated, multifaceted, it's very personal, it's an intimate process that you can't put into a box. It follows its own laws, per se. You can't say, well, it'll take you this long to go through this grief process, or it'll be just like this for you. There's some things that are very similar. We have guidelines that, people who study grief, or who've even gone through the process. But for the most part, it's a very alive process. And that something that is alive is very dynamic. And then the more dynamic something is, the less we can, put it into a box and contain it. Predict what's going to happen. It's less predictable. And so why is this important to discuss? What does this matter, and how does this relate to what we're listening to or hearing about in the Bhagavatam? Because grief is universal. We all experience it to different degrees. But we live in a world where, due to its temporal nature, we're bound to experience grief. And here, the pun is intended, it's only a matter of time, right? Before we lose something goes away, and then we suffer over it. And so that's why it's important. So I had a teacher when I first came to the Bhakti Center, and he would give classes, and he would always say, don't waste the good suffering. So some discomfort, some suffering comes, what do we do with that? And he would speak about how it becomes an opportunity. And so, this was like his little one-liner, don't waste the good suffering. He'd always say that, and I never forgot that. And so in that mood, we explore grief. And not to make light of it, but to actually understand it and go deeper into it. Oscar Wilde said, "Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground." And when I read that, I was really intrigued by it. Like, wow, what does this mean? And so this is the exploration of that. So in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Kṛṣṇa says to Arjuna, verse 11, he says, "While speaking learned words, you're mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead." Okay, so what's going on here? Is Kṛṣṇa being insensitive to Arjuna's grief, or is he not being a good listener? You know, sometimes you tell someone something and they're like, "Oh no, you're okay, it's fine," you know, or something, some other ways of where you don't feel heard. But as a matter of fact, going back to the listening thing, it wasn't until the second chapter that Kṛṣṇa responded to Arjuna. So he gave him this whole big space to express himself, and then he starts speaking to him. So even Kṛṣṇa is a really good listener. But what is he doing? It's not that he's not having compassion for the suffering of Arjuna in the moment. As he's even taking the time before a battle is beginning to stop and listen. So that's not a good listener. Then, you know, what is? But he's giving proper perspective. It's not that Kṛṣṇa wants us to be sad and miserable, or wants us to just, you know, spiritually bypass our suffering. He's trying to show us what the true value is of the things that we grieve. Is this worth grieving for? And now that I'm in grief, and maybe it is, and now that I'm in grief, now what do I do? Okay, I'm in grief. Arjuna's in grief. He's suffering. Now what? Where do I go from here? That's what this whole conversation is that they're having. So how can this reminder of the things that are temporary, because this is when we experience grief, is loss, and so loss is because things are temporary, otherwise they would stick around forever. How does this bring me knowledge of the eternal? And one thing I wanted to say is that it's really important that we understand that because we experience grief, it doesn't mean that there's a lack of spiritual advancement. It's actually a testament of our human experience. So when we grieve for things in this material world, it doesn't mean that we're not making any spiritual progress, or we don't have it together. Spiritual maturity is not that we don't grieve, but it's how we move through that process, how we experience it, and how we come out on the other side of that process. Grief is a journey of the living being. Everyone experiences this. I had a friend who I was talking to, and she was expressing some grief over something that she lost. And you know, she would say, "I feel like this, I feel this," and you know, these deep emotions that come when you lose something. And then after every sentence, every feeling that was real and that was profound and that was raw, and you can feel what's coming out of her heart, she would say, "But I know I shouldn't, but I know," you know, and then inserting these spiritual teachings. And I heard, I listened, but ultimately what we talked about was, let yourself grieve, let yourself feel what you're missing, these emotions, what is happening. And it was just a beautiful example of how often we don't allow ourselves to grieve for things. So the good news, there's a Native American speaker, teacher, or guide. His name is Martin Pritchell. Someone directed me to some of his lectures where he speaks about grief. And he says, grief is praise because it is the natural way that love honors what it misses. And so it starts to take grief and show us the other side of it. So grief is to acknowledge love and loss. We don't grieve for things that are meaningless to us. So the other side of that coin is love. Spiritual maturity is coming to the realization of what is worth ascribing meaning to. So is this so meaningful that I'm grieving over it? And maybe it is. And so that discernment is the spiritual maturity, not I don't feel anything. That is not the position of the Bhakti tradition. That's not what's happening with Arjuna here. He's feeling. When we grow out of childhood, we don't grieve for our toys, right? The older you get, like more and more as the years go on, your room changes and your toys go away, and like you start putting in new things that have meaning to you, because they don't hold the same meaning to us, and we don't grieve anymore. We give them away, we throw them away, or if they do mean something, we still put them in a box or display them different. We see things as they are, and therefore our perspective to those things changes. And this perspective, this change in perspective, is what's being offered to us in this discussion about grief. So Martin, I'll call him Martin. I feel like I know him. He talks about how we've forgotten how to grieve, that we have throughout the generations and as a society, we've forgotten how to grieve. And if we don't grieve, we don't praise, because he sees praise as the other natural side of grief, or the natural progression of grief. If we don't praise, we don't appreciate. So where's the gratitude? Or is it just the suffering of I don't have this anymore, me. So can we be grateful for not only for what is here? We often practice gratitude. Okay, I'll be grateful for this, for that. But can we be grateful for what has been, even with that feeling of loss? And so it takes this sense of grief and it starts to transmute it a little bit into something, a little bit of a higher energy, a higher vibration. Francis Weller, who wrote a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, where he talks about moving through the process of grief as almost like a ritual, very real, spiritual, profound process. He says grief affirms the bonds of affection, of affinity, of love. So grief is an invitation for us to remember what never dies, right? Because we're talking about the temporal nature of things, and what's on the other side of temporality is eternity. To grieve is to celebrate and to praise, because we acknowledge the value of things. When we celebrate things, we glorify them. There's no separation in time or in space. So when we're all sitting together and we're telling stories to each other about, that remember this time, or one time this happened, you start to feel it. If someone tells you a story of like a prank that your friend pulled on you or something like that, what happens? Everyone starts laughing. You feel that. That's rasa. And so if we can experience rasa, or if someone tells you a sad story, you feel that, wow, just by that expression, that remembering, that speaking it, that bringing it back, in one sense, glorifying it. It's not necessarily glorifying, but a different level of glorifying it. You make it real, you make it present. It's present, but it's limited, right? Because it's not like that whole scene reappears right then and there. We're experiencing some effect of it. We're experiencing the rasa. And so if we can experience that with our lives, our relationships, with the things that we remember, our sacred memories, what to speak of Kṛṣṇa and his Lila and the rasas that come in relationship to him. Because this is what's happening for Arjuna. He's speaking about Kṛṣṇa. He's not just lamenting any old thing or someone that he knew. This is his deepest, closest friend, and so he's experiencing that, what we can experience when we share something like this, but to a much, much higher degree. And as I was thinking about this, I remember a few classes back, someone shared, I don't remember who it was, we were talking about that hole shape, that Kṛṣṇa shaped hole in our heart. And if we take our grief, all of our little griefs in this world and this life, and we boil them down to remove all of the things that are not its essence, not its all the impurities. What is left behind when we remove everything that isn't just the essence of our grief, and it's our separation from Kṛṣṇa. That's what we're experiencing. What I've come to realize about this grief process and about that specific thing that I just said, about how we're experiencing on a lesser degree our separation from Kṛṣṇa, our grief that we're also missing our best friend, is that I haven't realized this yet. I'm still grieving for my toys, for the things of this material world. You take this away from me, I'm a wreck. And yeah, we grieve. Like I said before, it's important to remember that we grieve things of value. So I don't know that we'll ever stop grieving for things that are valuable to us. It's not just that we can only and should only grieve for Kṛṣṇa. We just start to realize more and more, oh, these things, okay, this has its place over here. We start to change our relationship to things, and then again go back to that proper perspective. So in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Kṛṣṇa says, from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode of son of Kunti never takes birth again. And so when I read this, I was thinking, that's it. That's that eternal peace that's missing, that remembering. Never takes birth again. What is that? If I'm eternal, you're eternal, we're all eternal. We're never taking birth again. And so when that memory comes, then everything gets put into its proper perspective. Then temporal and eternal each have their meaning, and we see clearly. So when we're experiencing grief, it becomes an opportunity that is so much, much more than just our suffering. It's about our celebration, praise, remembering, and the never dying. Right? We remember when we live and love and grieve and praise from the essential basic truth that we never do die, then our suffering diminishes. Then we turn that grief into praise. And I don't say this from, oh, I have realized this, like, wow, yes, I remember I will never die, and therefore the things that I grieve over, I'm okay, and everything's fine. But it's a constant remembering, it's a constant process of taking a look at the things that bring us this sense of grief, and putting them into the proper perspective, and being honest about where we are with things. It doesn't have to be the most valuable person or the most valuable thing for us to feel grief over. We are in a world where we are attached to things, and that's okay. The problem is not the attachment. The problem is whether we're conscious or unconscious about the attachment. Because if I'm attached to something and have no idea that I'm attached to something, no idea what the effect of this attachment is, then I can't do anything about it. Then I'm in ignorance of it. If I'm attached to something and realize, maybe this isn't the greatest thing to be attached to, or, okay, I'm attached to this thing, but I realize that it is of a temporary nature, then I can move from that place. Then I know what to do, and I know how to navigate that attachment, and to direct the course per se, of our attachment. So when Krishna is telling Arjuna, only the wise, when he's speaking about the non-wise will lament over these things. The wise don't lament over these things. He's not being insensitive. He's trying to help him put things in a proper perspective. Now, Arjuna, this whole situation is on a way bigger level. He's asking him to put relationships, people's lives in their proper perspective. That is the same principle, but it's at a different level. I'm not there yet to take people's lives and put them into that perspective. There's so many relationships in my life that if they were to be taken away, or people in my life, I would suffer, and I don't know how I would. It would be a process of taking those things and putting them in their proper perspective. The process being to experience, live, and move through the grief, just like Arjuna's doing. He's moving through that process by speaking what is going on. He's like sharing his heart. He's opening up. He's not, I'm a warrior, I shouldn't grieve. Oh, everything's okay. Nothing's wrong. I remember Kṛṣṇa telling me about, the temporary nature of things. And I remember that he said, the wise don't grieve. He's not saying any of that. He's remembering the good times that he had with Kṛṣṇa, how they spoke to each other, their relationship. He's grieving. He's going through that process, and he's doing it freely. So that verse is followed by the next verse in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. Going back to that, verse 12, where he says, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all of these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." And that's the piece of eternity, right? Going back to the beginning of how can this reminder, and not just a reminder of often painful reminder. We acknowledge grief as painful. How can this reminder of the temporary bring me to knowledge of the eternal? Right? And so only through what's happening is we have verse 11, verse 12. Okay, the wise don't grieve. Everything's eternal. I'm eternal, you're eternal. This is what Krishna is saying to Arjuna. In between those two verses is this enormous process of grief. He's just in the middle of the battlefield. He couldn't speak it. I don't know if that was a speculation or not, but that's what it is. And so this process of grief is sacred. Going back to the holy ground, right? Where there is grief, there is holy ground. And I believe William Blake, I think he was a poet, writer. I think, the deeper the grief, the greater the joy. And only in this context, I think, does it all make sense. What do you mean joy? So that entire process of the loss of something or someone, the process of grief, which is the acknowledgement that this was so valuable to me, that I love this so much, this person, speaking about his friend, I love this person so much. It meant so much to me. Here are all the good things about it. Here are all the good things to share about it. Only in that way does it get turned into the praise, and then is the joy. We've seen those experiences of someone experiencing sadness over the loss of someone, and they start sharing stories, and the stories start giving them the memories, and they start laughing. They're back in that space, and at the end, they feel relief. There's some some closure, in the sense, not that, okay, we said this story, we spoke about it, and now it's over, now I don't feel anything, but it's a continuous process of closure, continuous process of letting go, of detaching, letting go, putting things in the proper perspective. When we detach from something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it lost its value, but our relationship to it has shifted, has changed, has turned into something else. Bittersweet, maybe, or whatever it is. Or sometimes it's complete detachment of our relationship is now with this thing, or those toys. I don't think about them. I don't think about my childhood toys. There's no emotion there. That's the meaning that they've taken them. I do remember them. The memory is there, but the relationship has completely shifted. So I'll ask, I guess it'd be nice if we went into some discussion about this. But the question here is, or not so much the question, the focus, the highlight is to, one, we're witnessing what Arjuna is going through, this grief process. And if the Bhagavatam is speaking about the grief process, then there's something there. We're watching, again, I think I said this twice already. We're witnessing Arjuna's process. What does it mean? And I think we'll come to that as it progresses. There was a verse that I was thinking about referencing, it's kind of like a spoiler. So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna have any Bhagavatam spoilers. But it does shift. Something happens, and we'll see what that is. Arjuna will speak it. It will come from his own realization, from his own words. He'll share something about the process that he's just gone through. There's a song that I learned that reminds me of this grief, loss, separation, joy, and the temporary nature of things and the eternal nature of things. And so this song says, I am here and I am free, and forever I shall be. I am learning in the ways of those who came before me. And there's another verse to it where it repeats this: I am here and I am free, and forever I shall be. I am, it's in Spanish, so I'm translating it. I am breaking those chains that are imprisoning myself, self with a capital S, those attachments. I'm breaking those chains, right? Letting go of the things that are temporary and breaking the chains. But I'm here and I'm free. Forever I shall be. We're not ever going to stop being. And so I've noticed, and this is one of the things that kind of sparks this exploration into the grief process as a sacred spiritual process, because I was noticing that when some small grief would come, some pain over some loss of something, and usually every situation can kind of be boiled down to, where we're suffering, we kind of lost something, whether it's, even a sense of pride, a sense of feel like feeling a lack of love or something. There's some loss there that's related to our suffering in any moment, in any situation. I was noticing that this song would come to my mind often, and I wasn't, it wasn't because someone passed away or I lost some relationship, or it was just these daily grief, little grief, baby grief. But I would sing this song, and just the reminder that, oh yeah, this is just a moment in time. This is just a moment in time. This is just a moment in time. Everything passes, but I am here. I'm free, and forever I shall be. That's that remembrance of the most essential basic truth that is foundational to our scripture, to our philosophy. But it's also really, really hard to attain. But it's the remembering of that you just keep adding to it. We experience it over and over and over again until one day, oh, yeah, we'll know it, we'll realize it. And then even our relationship with grief will change. There was something, in relationship, going back to the relationship of this grief, of this separation with Kṛṣṇa, we have the process to help us move through that. Right? Kirtana, glorifying, praising, Shravanam, Smaranam, remembering that he is ever present, that he's here when we remember him. Because just like those stories of our friends or our loved ones or our past good times, we can invoke them and make them real. What to speak of Kṛṣṇa, who is actually, because of his potency, we can glorify him, speak about him, tell those stories. And unlike our loved ones or our younger selves or something like that, who can't be present, but only in a limited form of rasa, he can actually be present in all of these things, because he's no different than his name, in form, Lila, his associates, all of it is Kṛṣṇa. So this is grief transformed, transmuted, taking that energy and elevating it, turning it into a beautiful process that may still be cause us some feeling, some discomfort, some pain. But just like William Blake said, the deeper the grief, greater the joy. So for our discussion, I was thinking, since there's just a few of us, we can discuss either two things, because we all are different, have different experiences of grief. Many people experience loss of loved ones even very early on in their lives. I never had that experience. I lost an uncle when I was maybe about 5 or 6, and I was told, my mother would tell me, he lived with my parents. They were young, and I was like 3 or 4. I was like 3 or 4 years old, and I was so close to him. I was so attached to him. When he passed away, I had this habit before he passed away of going to the window at the time that I knew he was going to come home and waiting for him, because he was the first person that I would see when he would come home, and he would play with me and hold me and all of these things. I don't remember this. This was my mother's account, but for a long time I kept going to that window, waiting for him. So but I don't remember that. I remember the funeral clearly, but I don't remember the wake. In Mexico, they do a wake that is for 9 days, and they actually view the body in the house. So I couldn't speak to people about the loss of someone, because I didn't remember until my 30s, where I experienced grief and the loss of someone. So we may not have that experience where we can express that. So the discussion will be, what is your experience of grief? For a long time, I don't get it. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Someone passes away, I can't relate to that at the deep, deep, deep core feeling. Now that's shifted and it's different. Or if you do have an experience of grief, sharing your grief in the form of a praise, so we can hold space for each other in that process of taking something that's been painful, but can be actually joyous on the other side. And so we'll stop there and then move into our discussion.